Her voice is so funny, isn't it, robot lady?
Mm. Cool. Right, we've got more people trickling in now, which is good. Welcome everyone. If you haven't been to an OGA webinar before, then this will be new to you. If you have, then sorry, I'm going to do the same old spiel I do every time. So you can just go and get a quick cup of tea while I do it if you want. But yeah, welcome to this webinar. It's a popular one. There's quite a few who have registered, which is really great to see. Obviously something that growers want to know more about, and we've got a very experienced and very skilled grower to talk to us about business skills for market gardeners. Just a little brief bit about the Organic Growers Alliance. We are a members-based organisation. We support organic growers, certified and non-certified, and in conversion across the UK through the sharing of knowledge by our quarterly magazine, the Organic Grower magazine, a fortnightly podcast, lots of webinars like these ones, some in-person events, an online forum, a members area on our website, and loads more. And yeah, we are the voice of organic horticulture in the UK at the moment. And yeah, we have a lot of events coming up. You probably will have seen them if you're already a member. But just to plug this one quickly, we've got our AGM this weekend. We would really love it if you are near Bristol, or if you can make it this weekend and you haven't got a ticket yet, or you're umming and ahhing. Come along. It's going to be really great. We've got a lot of exciting and really important things to talk to you about in the AGM. Some big things going on for the OGA. We're growing and we're moving and we're shifting. So yeah, we would love to hear your opinion on these things. And also we'll be doing a really exciting talk with some growers and organic retailers from Bristol, chaired by one of our directors, Stephen. And then followed by some workshops looking at how we can integrate ethics and care into the organic movement a little bit more. And then we'll just have a lovely dinner as well, cooked by Two Trees Catering, and some music and some local beers. And then on Sunday, we've got a tour of the community farm. So if you haven't got your ticket yet and you're thinking about coming, get it now. We'd love to see you there. But if you can't make it, the AGM will be online. So we'd also really appreciate if you can come to that. That's from 1 till 3 p.m. on Saturday. We just want to hear more people what growers want, so we can better support you. I will leave it there. Just some housekeeping. This is a webinar. If you haven't been to a webinar before, this doesn't allow you to talk. It is also being recorded. Once my internet works properly, I will put it up online, so it will be on our YouTube channel, and you can share it with growers who wanted to make it but couldn't tonight. For the structure, Kate's going to do about an hour of talking, and then leave about half an hour for questions. Please put your questions in the Q&A box, just because it's easier for then Kate to see at the end, and she can like tick them off as they go. Any questions that do end up in the chat box, which is different, I will try and forward over. I'll keep track of, so that I can let Kate know. But please do feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat box. It's always nice to see where growers are from, and what you're doing and what you're up to at the moment. Just good also get an idea of the kind of geographic area of who we're targeting with these webinars and how we can do better. Without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Kate Collyns for this brilliant webinar. Over to you, Kate.
Oh, thanks, Lizzie. Hopefully can everyone hear me at the back? Hopefully everyone can hear and see me okay. I've just actually looked up the Q&A box because I can never remember where it is. And if you've got the same version of Zoom that I do, on the right hand side at the bottom there's a little bar. It says more and 3 dots in a circle, and the Q&A box is in there. But like Lizzie says, you can always pop things in the chat. And whenever I go to webinars, I love it when people are sort of saying, hello, I'm blah blah blah, gardener from this part of the UK or the world or whatever. And then quite often people find out they're near each other and can offer tips as everything else is going on. So feel free to chat in there. That would be great. Welcome to this webinar on business skills for market gardeners. Sounds quite niche, but hopefully it will be useful. And as Lizzie says, I'm going to try and whiz through. You can imagine there's an awful lot to cover. So I'm going to try and whiz through some main areas. And if there's anything that I've gone too fast or something doesn't make sense, then please pop it in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll try and go back and address it. I'm never sure with these things what's the most useful for people to talk about. So I thought if I talk about a bit of everything, then hopefully we can go back and talk in more detail about the bits that really people are most interested in. So hopefully that will work out. So my name's Kit Collyns, and I'm a veg grower in Wiltshire. My business is called Grown Green, and I rent land off a farm called Hartley Farm, just outside Bath, in England, in the UK. Let's see if I can get my slideshow working now. So there's a drone shot. Hopefully you can't see my chat and Q&A boxes, they might get in the way. There's a drone shot there of the land that I rent. In total, it's probably just under 2 acres. And I always describe myself as rather than a small business, a micro business. And I started it 14 years ago now, which makes me feel very old, even though in my head I'm still a new entrant and learning all the time. I did the Soil Association apprenticeship from 2008 to 2010. So I worked in an office before that and didn't have very much experience in growing. And that was a great work-based placement where I worked full-time for at least minimum wage on a farm near Swindon, and then 4 times a year, so over the 2 years, 8 times in total, the group of us that were doing the apprenticeship on various farms would come together and have seminars for weekends at various farms. And that was a really lovely way of learning, both on the farm and then from other farms and other trainees and other growers, and going on lots of farm walks. And just a quick plug here, some of you might have seen that the OGA Training Network has just launched, where we're hoping to do something similar. If you're interested in finding out more, pop that in the chat and we'll send you some information. So I rent this land off the farm. It's a beef farm mostly, but there's also a lot of horses, and they have a farm shop and cafe. So they were very happy. They were looking for somebody to grow and expand their business and to kind of contribute to their business. It's really good for them to have a grower on site. So we've got chalkboards everywhere saying grown on the farm, organic veg grown on the farm, and it's really great for the farm shop and also the kitchen to be able to use produce that we've grown on the farm. As of 2023, as well as renting the land that you can see there with the tunnels, my other half and I, after 15 years of looking, also managed to buy a similar size field just around the corner, not from that farm, but from somebody else. So now we're doubling, well, not quite doubling, but we're expanding into that field as well, but more with agroforestry and then beds in between. And there's lots of hedge work going on at the minute. So, but the Hartley farm site is the main market garden site, just with some other bits going on and larger field scale crops going on in the other field more recently. So you can probably see from the pictures there, the kind of size of tunnels, they're all a bit of a mishmash. So we've kind of collected tunnels as we've gone on. So the first 2 tunnels, which are the sort of bottom right, we put those up in 2011. And then a few years later, we put another one up, and so on and so on and so on. So that explains the sort of higgledy-piggledy nature of how they're set up. And we also had to put them up in line with the hedge, because that's what our landlord wanted. So again, if you were starting from scratch, that might not be how you'd want it to look. So we've got 4 of tunnels. One is quite a bit bigger than the others, but roughly they're all about 20 by 60 feet, which is, I think, sort of 6 by 20 meters or just under. And then there's 2 smaller tunnels which are about half that size, and then 2 smaller tunnels again that we use for propagation. And they're very low. I have very local outlets, so about half of what we grow we sell through the farm shop, the on-site farm shop and cafe. So we sell it to them because we are a separate business. and we invoice them. We also sell to local shops, other cafes and restaurants, local box schemes. We do our own very small scale mini box scheme of, between 5 and 20 boxes a week. And it's not a set box. We literally send out a list of what we have available, and then people just let us know what they want. And it's based on the school run, basically. So it's based on the parents group for my son's school. And also I have a part-time employee who goes to a different school in Bradford and Avon, and he sort of offers veg delivery by bike to them as well. So it's very small. It's not really, very grand to call it a box scheme. It's very small. So the direct element of our business is quite small compared to the rest of it. So I'm quite odd. Most small growers would sell most things direct because you get a better price, but we'll talk about that a bit later on. So these are the areas that I'm going to just look at this evening as the kind of perhaps the most important or most common areas that people are interested in. So we'll have a quick look at finding land and finding funding, but probably most people here will have one or other or both of those sorted, and they might be more interested in the more kind of businessy side of things, so business structure and HMRC and that kind of thing. But we'll whiz through just in case it's useful and that's what people are after. So we'll look at finding land, finding funding, finding a market, sort of the three things you need to get going. And then once you've got those things secured, then you kind of look at which business structure is right for the business idea that you've got. We'll have a quick look at what to include in a business plan, have a look at cash flow and finances, and hopefully everyone won't fall asleep when we look at the numbers. And then we'll talk about lovely HMRC. I am very grumpy with at the moment, but anyway, and we'll have a quick look at the other kind of paperwork that you might come across. So sort of common paperwork, so regulations, and if you're going to go for organic certification, and why you might and why you might not. And hopefully if there's time, we'll have a really quick look at profitable crops, because at the end of the day, that's sort of, if you're starting a business, that's kind of the bottom line. If you're not growing and selling profitable crops, then you haven't got a viable business probably. Right, so looking at finding land and premises, just if some people here are literally at the really early stages of not knowing where to start, I just thought I'd write down some ideas of where to find land if you're not lucky enough to have land already or have it in the family. So obviously there's buying land, which might be an option for some. And there are specific land and estate agents that you can approach, or places like Rightmove do also list it as well. We actually found our field. It's kind of impossible to find small small plots of land, especially where we are in the southwest of the UK, because anything smaller than 10 acres is kind of sold at a really high price for pony paddocks. So it's very difficult, A, to find it, and then B, to find it and not just kind of get outpriced immediately. But we actually looked up on the land registry certain parcels of land near us when no one really seemed to know who owned it. And if you pay £3, you can sort of go on the land registry and click on certain parcels and get a name and address for who owns that land. And then we wrote to the guy who owned it, and didn't hear anything for a few years, and then wrote again. And it just so happened that we wrote again when he was maybe thinking of selling it. So that was, really lucky. But if we hadn't kept on going, then we wouldn't have got there. So if you're struggling, if you're able to buy, or as a group or individually, that might be one option. So have a look on the land registry. There's also land trust and share farming as options. So there's quite a few farmers, especially older farmers, who maybe would like other enterprises on their land. And obviously horticulture is a great enterprise to have on your land, because they only maybe need to spare an acre or a few acres. So that's very doable if you've got a large estate. And so that's worth approaching livestock farmers, arable farmers in the area that you're in or that you'd like to grow in, and just approach them directly and say, what do you think about this? Can I come to you with a business plan, come to you with a proposal? There's also, cooperative models as well, where so it wouldn't necessarily just be you renting the thing. You could go into become a cooperative with the farmer as a separate business, or with other organisations like charities or something. So there's tenant farming, where you're literally the tenant. So that's my model, as well as private land, renting from private lands and private farmers. There's also renting from local councils. So a lot of local councils have council farms. They tend to be quite long tenancies, so they don't always come up very often. But it's worth, again, looking and approaching the council and say, well, I'm not really looking for this 100-acre farm, but I'm looking for a smaller plot. And I remember hearing that, I think it was in Carmarthenshire or somewhere in Wales, there was some work to try and divvy up some of the larger farms to make maybe 4 or 5 smaller plots available for people to work on. So I mentioned the National Trust as well. They own a lot of land, and they do, again, they're a sort of quite well known landlord for farmers. But there's also a lot of country houses that have wall gardens. So they might be interested if you come to a specific country house with a derelict wall garden, or a wall garden that isn't very productive. Depending on who you talk to, you can talk to people who are really keen on the idea and might be like, oh yes, we'd love that. That would be excellent. Come and do something with this. As well as established farms, it might be worth approaching pretty much anyone who owns land. So it could be estates rather than actual farms. Places that have weddings, hotels, places like Wessex Water. So water companies can own land in interesting places. Might be worth talking to them, see if that's possible. And then community projects, which covers things like community supported agriculture, or CSAs. So that's a really good model for sharing risks. So you're coming together with a community group, and the board of members will run the business with you. And so it's not all on you, and that's a good thing to get involved in. Transition Network might have some links for where to find land, and also local wildlife trusts. Where we are in Wiltshire, Wiltshire Wildlife Trust has recently taken on an awful lot of agricultural land, actually. So I think and they're managing it for them. So it's worth approaching them as well as a possible landlord or business partner. And probably some of you will know of the Ecological Land Cooperative as well, as a way to find land. You're basically buying, I think, a 99 or whatever, X number of year lease. So you're renting it technically, but very, very long term. So that model might work for you as well. That's just an overview of some land finding ideas. So here's some ideas for funding. So obviously, if you're buying, then you might want to look at things like mortgage or long-term bank loans. More ethically minded banks who might look kindly on something like a market garden are places like Troodos, they're Dutch, but they've got offices based in Bristol. The Cooperative Bank, and the Ecology Building Society. Quite a lot of these places will offer mortgages based on land or based on ethical businesses, so they're worth a look. If you don't want to be tied to a bank or have to pay back loans and things, then there's an awful lot of work the CSA network do, the Community Supported Agriculture. They always have lots of links and lots of news about community support that might be available in terms of funding, but other support as well. So, training and other things. So that's worth a look, especially if you are going to go down the CSA route. There's crowdfunding, which is an increasingly popular way of raising funds. So, places like I ran a crowdfunder on Crowdfunder, the Crowdfunder website, 2 years ago, to raise money for a tractor. And if it's for a specific project, then you're more likely to get funded if you sort of set a deadline of 4 to 6 weeks, and it's for a particular project. Like, we want to buy this farm, we want to buy this equipment, we need whatever, you want to start a market garden here, and we need this much money. So there's a few, not just Crowdfunder, there's a few other crowdfunding platforms to have a look at, and most of them offer lots of help to make it successful for you. If you're a community business, so you're not a sole, a private individual just raising money. If you're a charity or a CIC, which we'll look at later, community interest company, then they won't necessarily charge you any fees. Whereas if you're raising money for yourself, then they will charge you a percentage of what you raise as their fee. So that's just worth bearing in mind. On crowdfunding as well, if you are a CIC or a charity, you can sometimes find sort of match funded donations from certain businesses who use those platforms to find people to fund, basically. So if you type in your type of business, places like Crowdfunder will say, we can match you with this, and you'll get an extra £5,000 from this housing company because they need to offset their development that they're building down the road or something. There's trusts and charities to look at for funding. I don't have a huge amount of experience with these, but I'm aware of places like Esme Fairbairn Plunkett Foundation, Kindling Trust. Natura is an interesting one if you're a younger grower. I can't remember there's an age limit, but if you're under, I think it's 30 something, then they have grants available for businesses. So that's worth looking at. And there's probably, if you sign up to things like the OGA newsletter and the LWA newsletter and the CSA network letter, then quite often they might tell you and put you in touch with and give you leads on new funding rounds that are open. They tend to be more open for, again, community-based projects or models of business rather than private individuals, but it's worth having a look. There's also funding available from government, central government, and developed nations. So in the UK, there's DEFRA and the Department of Food and Rural Activities, I think it is. And then the RPA is the Rural Payments Agency. So they administer all the payments from DEFRA. So basically subsidies. There's been a lot of change over the last few years from the basic payment system to where you had to have, I think it was at least 5 hectares, 12 and a half acres before you could apply. But that's been scrapped now, which is excellent news for smaller growers. So it's possible to do things like I've signed up with Countryside Stewardship mid-tier and also Sustainable Farming Incentive, which is SFIs, which I'm sure a lot of people will have heard about. And you can get grants and just sort of revenue for being organic, for example. And then actions you take, you can get money for doing them. So whether that's planting trees or laying hedges or not using pesticides or doing soil tests and that kind of thing. So if it's stuff you're doing anyway, or you want to do anyway, it's worth looking at that as a extra income source to get you going. And then other sources of funding and support, some suggestions. It's worth looking at Lantra for skills training. Sometimes there's sort of funded places through there. The Woodland Trust can offer some places. Quite a lot of people are doing things with farm clusters where you can get training that's funded by usually from mayors. And councils also can offer sort of funded trainings and sometimes small grants for specific things. The Wiltshire Council were administering a rural prosperity fund, which I think they do every year, but it changes how much they offer. But councils are worth looking at. So just basically sign up to everything is always a good idea, and then see what comes in. So that's a very quick look at funding. Let's have a very quick look at finding your market, which is, once you've got land and money sorted, the really important thing is who are your customers. So the two main things to think about are, are you going to sell more direct or more wholesale? If you sell more food direct, and that basically means direct to the end customer, so at a market stall, veg box, honesty stall, that kind of thing, you'll get a better price. If you're selling wholesale, you won't be able to charge as much as if you were selling it straight to the customer. But if you're selling direct, then for example, if you're holding a market, you run the risk of having lots of veg left over that's wasted, especially in the early days. If it's a new market or you're new at a market, people don't know you're there yet. So you might take loads of veg and maybe only sell half of it, and then you've wasted all the rest. And if you want to run a veg box as well, usually takes quite a lot of admin. And it's also worth thinking, if you do want to go down the veg box route, are you only selling what you're growing, or do you want, for maybe 6 to 9 months of the year, or do you want to have a veg box all year round so you don't lose customers over the hungry gap? In which case, are you buying stuff in? How is that all going to work? Will it still be financially viable if you're buying in veg? Will you make enough on the markup, basically, to make the business work? So these are all just things to have in your head. If you do go down the veg box route, it's also worth thinking about, are you going to be delivering the boxes? Are people going to be collecting? Will there be collection points? And in terms of admin, there's now a range of really good platforms who do a lot of the hard work for you and set you up with delivery routes, and people pay online before they've had their box, so you don't have to chase up individual customers, which can take a lot of admin time. So there's just a few suggestions there. There's Growing Good, there's Ubi, and the Open Food Network are all ways of sort of having your own veg box website without kind of having to pay to have a website as well. Obviously, they will charge a fee. I think the Open Food Network are often, it will change depending on what size you are, but that's probably the same for the others as well. So it's worth looking at all of those, and any new software options that come on the market in the next year or so. Other direct ideas are market stalls, obviously, but also mobile van stands. Pick your own is direct. Honesty stall outside the farm. These are all good ways of getting a better price. Basically, the better price you can get with the least admin is kind of the thing to aim for generally. Farm shops and garden centres, restaurants and cafes. So that is wholesale, but there's a difference between selling wholesale to, for example, these guys, so farm shops, cafes, restaurants, pubs, and then selling wholesale to a wholesaler. So obviously, if you're selling wholesale to a wholesaler, there will be another middleman who will be wanting a cut. So you'll probably not get the price that you'll get if you were selling straight to restaurants, for example. So sort of rough rule of thumb is, obviously you get 100% of the price if you're selling it direct to the customer. You might get 60 to 75% if you're selling it to restaurants of a sort of direct price. And then you might get 50% if you're selling it to a wholesaler who's then selling it on, or maybe even worse than that. But if you've got a huge glut of something, it might be worth it just to get something back. So if you've got 50 kilos of courgettes you need to shift, then it might be worth thinking about selling it to wholesalers or wholesaling it to other veg box schemes. Some other ideas are selling it to schools, particularly primary schools, although I think that's increasingly difficult because everything's sewn up with pre-prepared meals now. But things like snacks, if you do fruit, then government pay for Key Stage 1 kids, so kids under the age of 6, to get fruit for snacks. So if you've got a lot of apples, you might be able to get into your local primary schools with your apples. There's care homes, think about selling your lovely veg to, and also hospitals. And a lot of places do want to open their procurement up to local growers. So it's worth having a look anyway, especially local smaller care homes. And then thinking about your market, which crops will you grow? Which crops will sell well for your market? If you've got a very traditional customer base, they might not be that interested in exotic veg, and that kind of thing. If you're growing unusual veg, you will then have to educate customers as to what they are, which might take time. And then how much land and resources will you need for the crops that you're thinking of? And I've just mentioned there the CSA horticultural cropping tool. Just put that out there. Wait, I think I've got a slide of a picture there. So on the CSA network website, there is a tool that Ben Raskin put together years ago now for the Soil Association / CSA network. And it's downloadable for free. It's basically sort of based on an Excel spreadsheet. And you can probably see there that you can type in the top, if you're running a veg box scheme, number of people you want to, you've got in your veg box scheme, so say 50 boxes a week. And then you can just adjust all these quantities just to give you a rough idea of how much space you'll need for everything. So I've just put in some very rough quantities. I've also put in a approximate price per unit, because that's also worth doing just to see what the value of your 50 veg boxes a week will be by the end of the year, approximately. And you can change, I don't know if you can see exactly where it is, but you can change whether you're optimistic or medium or pessimistic as to what kind of year you'll have in terms of weather or pests. So you can say, you know, of everything we grow, 50% grows or 75% grows. So you can change that and see a kind of bad version versus a good version, just to kind of prepare you for the year ahead. And then, so yeah, that's just to give you an idea of the space there for your rotations. So you've got an allium patch, and then the total allium area comes at 0.21 hectares. And then there's a brassica patch, and that comes up at 0.12 hectares. Yeah, I'll put the link in the chat afterwards. And then beans and peas, obviously, and so on. So you can see in total it comes to just over a hectare of space, and that's what you could grow in a hectare. It's a suggestion. It's not, you know, this is what you will grow. So that's quite a useful thing to look at. And I will, after this, I'll write. Well, I don't just write my note to myself. I've got it there. I'll put a link in the chat. But like I say, it's on the CSA network website, so hopefully it should be easy to find as well. Okay, that's just a whizzy thing looking at markets. Now there's the really boring stuff. This is a look at business structures. Oh, Heron, do you want to? I don't know if you can speak, but if you've got a question, do you want to shove it in the chat just so that we can get that going? Anyway, sorry. Yeah, sorry, that's just popped up. So business structures, there's quite a few to choose from. The most kind of the simplest probably is sole trader. So that's basically you are the business. It's quite easy to set up. You just have to register with HMRC as a sole trader, and you just do a self-assessment tax return every year. So that's pretty straightforward. The sort of other, well, there's lots of popular options, but maybe the next most popular option is setting up as a limited company. And I'm sure a lot of people have heard of CICs or seen community interest companies. So a CIC is a type of limited company. It's kind of like limited company plus another layer of another layer of paperwork and regulation. But it's basically saying that you're a community focused business, so you're not making profits for shareholders. Any profits are for the community and go back into the business is the idea, and shareholders can't just take out money. And if you're a CIC, so you can be a limited company and then become a CIC, but you can't be a CIC without already being a limited company, if you see what I mean. So you have to set up as both at the same time if you're starting from scratch. So a limited company, that kind of business is a separate legal entity, whereas a sole trader, it is you. So if somebody wanted to sue the business, they would be suing you as a sole trader, whereas they would be suing or whatever Veg Market Garden Limited rather than you. It's just that you would be a director and you'd only be liable for whatever it is that your share value is worth, which is often like £1, quite commonly. So you're a separate legal entity, you register with Companies House. You need at least one director. You can have, you know, several directors. You have to do a company tax return, and all the directors have to do self-assessment, get tax returns as well. So it's extra for your accountant to do if you have one, or if you're doing it yourself. And if you're a CIC, you, on top of those base levels, you also have extra commitments. So you need to sort of have a look at the regulator, basically the CIC regulator. There's lots of information on there if that's what you're interested in. On the just a bit further down, I've put the gov.uk website, and it's actually a really good website and it's really clear. So that's worth having a look at if you're a bit confused as to what's what. So there's another model is business partnership. So that's two individuals or entities. So it could be two actual people, it could be two limited companies or some other kind of legal entity. It could be one person and a limited company, be it working as a being partners, and that makes up the business. And then the individuals do send in their own self-assessment tax returns. You could set up as a charity, and there's quite a lot of regulation. You have to register with the Charities Commission. That's not my area, but have a look at the Charities Commission website if that's what you're into. There's lots of really good information on there. And a not-for-profit community enterprise. Another option is a cooperative, and the uk.coop website has loads of really good information there. And just a caveat that if you're not sure, get legal advice. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not an accountant. So maybe talk to people who have the same business structure that you're interested in and find out if that works for them and what doesn't work. And then hopefully that will give you a good idea of the sort of thing that might suit you. And if you set up as one type and it's not working out, you can always, sort of dissolve a company or move from sole trader to limited company. So it's not, a forever. Once you've picked one, that's it forever. Obviously, it's just paperwork to do if you want to change it. So it's worth being as sure as you can be beforehand, but don't stress too much if it doesn't work out that way. So the broad difference is that there's more paperwork to do for companies because they're legal entities that are separate from yourself, which is what incorporated means. So corporated means it has a body. They've got an actual physical body. So that's the kind of downside, is that there's more paperwork to do, more tax returns and so on. But the liability is usually limited. So if you were to become insolvent or something terrible happened, you're removed from it. So it's a bit more arm's lengthy. But those are the kind of main differences, and that's a very whistle-stop tour of that. I should mention as well, actually, we were thinking of doing more in-depth OGA webinars on certain areas. So if there's something that you'd like, some really in-depth, meaty info on, whether that's business structures or anything else that we're just going to whiz through quickly, then put that in the chat as well. We're always happy to have more ideas for webinars, and we want to do things that people are really interested in and will really help them. So stick that in the chat too. Hopefully everyone's all right. I'm just droning on, but I can continue droning. Writing a business plan. So this is something that tends to give people the willies, just the idea of a business plan. But really, a business plan, it's for you as much as anybody else. So I know growers that I've spoken to say once they've done a business plan, they love that it's there, and some of them just put it, once they've sort of done one, they never look at it again for 10 years and then look at it again and go, oh, I didn't do that at all. That's not at all how the business unfolded. And others keep it live all the time, and find it really useful to go, right, what is it I want to do in the next year, in the next 5 years? How am I going to do this? And it might remind them of things where you just get so caught up in the nuts and bolts of growing veg, season after season, that it's easy to lose sight of the bigger picture. But basically, there are lots of templates online of business plans, and they broadly cover a summary. So you're just putting in what your business idea is, the aims of your business plan. So I want to grow organic vegetables for my local community, or I want to, if you've got an education element, I want to engage the community, I want to help people with their mental health, whatever the aims are, to do summary of a sort of elevator pitch, the aims of what you want to achieve, a financial summary. So if you're applying for any kind of funding or business loan or bank loan, whatever it might be, whoever it is will probably want to see it, will want to see a business plan. And like I say, it's really useful for you to put all your thoughts down, and to do the research where you might be missing bits. So a financial summary is obviously very useful, especially when it comes to investors or people who are loaning or people who are going to get involved in the business. They want to see, okay, you want to grow veg, but will that actually make money? Will you be able to cover your wages, the wages of anybody else? Will you be able to pay the rent if you're renting it? How will it, how do you envision it working out? Are you going to be turning over £90,000 a year in veg boxes and paying 3 growers and 10 grand rent, or how is it? They just want to see how it's all going to work out. Could put in a bit about your background and your experience. So I've been growing veg for X years, or I've got this experience in this part of the business. Some detail on the product, some information on the market. So we talked about trying to find a market and who is it, who's going to be your customer, who's going to buy the veg. Some research, so whether that's desk research, like you're looking up competitors, or you're looking up the state of the organic market, or sort of demand for veg boxes in the area. That people can't keep up with demand, so there's definitely need for more veg, more fresh veg. Some information on how you'll market yourself. Is it just going to be online? Is it all going to be very small scale and word of mouth? Is it going to be physical leaflets and flyers through people's doors? Social media campaigns, that kind of thing. Like I say, this is very brief covering of some of the main points. Logistics, so if you're delivering veg to people, either wholesale or veg boxes, how is it going to get there? Is it by bike? Will people come and collect? Are you dropping stuff off by van? Some approximate pricing, which is very much often a dark art pricing. Maybe we should do a separate seminar on how to set pricing. And then forecasts. So within the first year, maybe you will probably make a small loss. Within the second year, you will break even. Hopefully, within the third year, hopefully you'll be turning a small profit, that kind of thing, and rough numbers that you're aiming for on that. And then as part of the plan, you could say, this is where I want to be in a year, this is where I want to be in 5 years, and this is my vision for 10 years' time, where everybody in a 10-mile radius is eating lovely organic vegetables. So in your business plan, show your market research. So you could list other competitors nearby or nationwide. The USP, so your unique selling point. Why will people buy your veg and not either other local organic veg? Why will they not go to the supermarket? Why will they not get it from Ocado? What's so special about you? Is it just that it's picked and delivered the same day? Are they unusual varieties? Is there something especially ethical and amazing about how it's grown and the people involved? Is it especially supporting local community? Don't be shy about shouting how special your produce is and how amazing it is. If you've done or able to do any test trading, so I've just been growing a bit of salad from my little allotment and it's gone really well, then write that down as well. That's always useful. And any other experience, you might have also done a questionnaire to potential customers, so whether that's restaurants or individuals at a market, and they've all kind of filled in going, yes, we're desperate for salad, we really want salad, or we're desperate for fruit and strawberries, we buy loads of it. That's always really useful as well. And then a SWOT analysis, which hopefully I'm sure people will have heard of. So SWOT stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats. And that's kind of the key part with the USP, anything with an acronym. That's one of the key parts of your business plan. So what's the strength of your idea and your business? What's a weakness? And there's a subtle difference between opportunities and threats. So a strength might be, I've been growing veg for 20 years, and so I know what I'm doing. So that's really good. Weakness might be, I don't have much business experience, or I'm not sure if the market's ready, can afford organic vegetables. So it's really good to identify weaknesses and to show that you're aware of them, because anybody with a financial or business head will look straight for weaknesses and threats and say, oh, but what's going on there? Have you actually thought about this? And it's sometimes you can, not always, but sometimes you can turn weaknesses and threats into opportunities and strengths. So that weakness of I don't have a lot of business experiences, well, actually, I'm not wedded to any particular idea. I'm going to teach myself some really good business practices and not be boxed into a certain way of thinking. That could potentially be useful. Or a threat might be, oh, there's another business down the road who's selling organic vegetables. So that's a threat potentially, or they're about to set up and they might end up selling something the same as what I'm thinking of selling. But maybe that can be turned into an opportunity. Maybe you can sell things to them and maybe they'll be able to supply things that you're not growing potentially, and you can almost be an informal cooperative. So it won't always be possible, but it might be possible to do, at least make things positive, and at the very least show anyone looking at your plan that you've thought about all these things. Hopefully that makes sense. Right. More boring stuff. No, it's great. Let's have a quick look at money. So cash flow and accounting, which is probably what people think of when they're thinking, oh, business skills there. So obviously, if you're starting a business, you need to set up a business bank account. That's especially important if you are applying for funding. You will need to have a separate account so that people aren't just paying things into your private account and then they're thinking, hang on a minute, how do we know this is going to be used for what you'll say it's going to be used? So you need a business bank account. Most places, so many places set them up, whether it's online or with a high street bank. Sometimes it's free or free for 18 months. Other times you'll just pay a small charge, sort of £7 or £8 a month, but usually not too bad. And then it's really important to keep a basic cash book, which shows stuff coming in and stuff going out, the sort of bare minimum of record keeping. And that's so easy to do now with lots of different software. Put some down the bottom, like Xero, Sage, QuickBooks. I mean, there's tons now. I'm kind of on the generation where I still use my lovely spreadsheets, my Excel spreadsheets. I'm quite loath to part from them, but if you've not been brought up on them, then it's probably a lot easier to just go straight into the software that does it all for you and shows you lots of amazing graphs and does all your tax returns for you as well. So it's definitely not the admin burden that it used to be. Obviously, there's a charge for the software, but it's probably worth it for people, especially if you find it tricky to keep on top of things. But basically, the most important thing is just keep on top of what's coming in and what's going out. So for a profit and loss, which shows where you stand. So have you made a profit? It's like a snapshot. Have you made a profit in the last 12 months? Have you made a loss? Are you breaking even? What's the picture look like? It's really important to chase outstanding invoices. So things like those veg box ordering platforms, that's where they come in really handy because they save you lots of time if people are paying as they order. It's really important to monitor expenses and income. Obviously, it's quite useful to set monthly targets, but be realistic because it's really depressing if you constantly miss them. And then just a little plug for really simple, if you don't want to go down the software route, you can just have really simple spreadsheets. And I've got a really, really basic one on the next page. And if you really can't do any of this stuff, just get an accountant. It's really... that's what they're there for, and you'll pay them. But if it's going to save you days and days of work, then when you could be doing other things like growing veg, then it'll be worth the money. So this is just a quick look at the different kinds of spreadsheets. So different kind of financial documents. So a cash flow statement, or I call them cash book, cash flow, tracks the inflow and outflow of money into the business. And it also just gives you an insight into the financial health and sort of tells you where you are. Like, hang on a minute, there's a lot more money going out than coming in. That doesn't look very good. And operational efficiency. So hang on a minute, if we're spending lots of money on this, where can I save money and become more profitable? Profitable is such a dirty word. It's about being sustainable at the end of the day. You need to be able to pay yourself and your staff. And that's kind of all there is to it. I don't think it's an exploitative thing, or I definitely don't come at it as I'm going to be sitting here making loads of money. If you come to organic veg wanting to make loads of money, you're in the wrong business. So it's just about being sustainable and trying to pay people as good a wage as you can afford, really. So a profit and loss statement, or a P&L, abbreviations, it's a financial statement that summarizes all of the revenues, costs and expenses during a specific period. So like I say, it's like a snapshot. So during this time we incurred this much. I think I might have done a very brief example over the next page. But if you're a limited company, for example, then you must produce a P&L statement for all your shareholders. If you're the only shareholder, or you and a friend, or you and your other half, you'll all probably know anyway, but officially you need it as part of the statements. If you've got an accountant, they just do it all for you. But if you decide not to do an accountant, or you don't really understand what's going on, this is what's going on. So the P&L is good to have an idea of where you are currently financial health wise. And then a balance sheet calculates all of the company's assets on a specific date. So it's not just the money that came in, the money came out. It includes everything you started with as well, if you've got assets, and also all the liabilities. So bills you've not paid yet, basically. So you've got a big invoice for polytunnels that you haven't paid yet. So that's the liability. And also, if you've got investors in your business and they have equity in your business, then that's a liability. So they may be, they may have in their contract that if you were to sell the business, then they have to be paid the first £10,000 of the business and before anything else gets passed on. So that's kind of included in the balance sheet. And then total assets are the sum of all long-term, short-term, and other assets. Did I do that twice? Did that twice, sorry. It's been a long week. So that might just be your bank statements, and your cash book will kind of show you where you are. But it can also be useful to have everything in a specific document, again, especially if it's not just for yourself, if it's for funders or investors and things. It's also useful to have forecasts and projections for the years ahead, and to have targets. But like I say, as realistic as you want it, that sweet spot between being realistic, but also just to try and push you a little bit to do a little bit more. And here's a very, very basic spreadsheet from 10 years ago now. So this is just to show you if you're allergic to paperwork, it doesn't have to be very complicated. So I've literally just got a column of dates, what the invoice or the money in is, the amount including VAT, and then any VAT. So we'll talk about VAT shortly, but just, if you're doing these kind of accounts, it's good to note the VAT down. And then for my own benefit, I've moved on a bit. I've got more sophisticated spreadsheets these days, but they're not a lot more. It's just basically this. And it will just note down, is it wholesale, is it direct? But that's, for your own records, really, so you can see how much you're selling to which type of customer. And then totals at the bottom. And then similarly, very basic money out spreadsheet. So that spreadsheet there, I would highlight it when it's been paid. So that's what the green is for. So you can easily see quickly what you need to chase up and what you don't. And then you can do this again with money out as well. Just write, note down when you've paid stuff, so you can, you don't end up having to pay late payment fees or anything like that. And it's useful just noting down what's capital equipment, so you can kind of count that as an asset. So obviously things like polytunnels or maybe or tractors. If you were to sell the business, you could sell that equipment on and get some money back for the business. Whereas obviously seeds and other things you've used up already. They've been part of your running cost. So just very basic, easy to follow spreadsheets. This is a very rough summary of a year. So I might have what actually happened one year, my target for the next year, and then what actually happened that year, and I can compare it back and see how it compares. And I tend to write notes to myself so I can say, I spent 10 grand on a tractor, or lots of money on hedges, or I took on an extra person, or I was doing lots of childcare, so I was paying someone else rather than myself. Things like that. It's kind of worth bearing in mind for yourself, but also for the wider business and anybody looking at it. This is just a really rough example of a balance sheet, which is just useful to bear in mind, so you can kind of see where you are at any point. So I just said, for example, imagine a business where you had compare it year on year. So for example, maybe this year you had £3,300 in the bank, and you had £500 owing to you that someone hadn't paid yet but was about to. You had about 13 grand's worth of machinery and £1,000 of other bits and bobs. So your total assets were 17,800. And then money that you were owing, so your liabilities, or the business's liabilities, you owed £800 for a pond liner. You have other loan liabilities of 12,500, for example. So that's your total liability there, 13,300. So if you take that off everything else from your assets, then that shows that your business has currently got £4,500 assets, for example. So it's very just as a rough idea. Okay, right through. running out of time. So we'll talk about the dreaded tax man. So as I mentioned, if you're self-employed or you need to do a self-assessment tax return, they need to be in by the 31st of January each year. So the tax year runs generally from the 6th of April to the 5th of April the following year. So the tax return that I sent in, which had to be in by the end of January, was for the year 2023 to 2024, if that makes sense. So it's quite complicated to say unless you can see it written down. But the tax year runs April to April, and then you've got what's that, 9 months to basically fill in your tax return and submit it and pay everything you owe. And obviously, it would be lovely to do it by the end of April that year, and then it's all done. But especially as growers, you tend not to do it until it's winter, and it's like, oh, we're get it all in before January. For your any tax, it automatically calculates the tax that you owe, and it will include national insurance, class 2 and class 4 contributions, and student loans. So even if you feel like, oh, I've only earned £16,000, I won't owe anything, you will owe, unless you have another part-time job where you pay national insurance already. If this is your only income, the self-employed income, you will owe national insurance every week, which racks up to a few £100 for class 2. And then if you earn over a certain amount, you have to pay class 4 national insurance. This is before you pay tax. And then if you earn over that, you might have to pay tax on top of that as well for that bit that's over the threshold. If you have a student loan, that will also come out. So it is worth doing your tax returns as early as you can to prepare yourself, because you nearly always owe more than you think. If you have employees and they are on pay as you earn, or you are on pay as you earn as well, if you've set up that way and as a company, you pay their tax for them and they just get the remainder in their wage packet. If you're a small business, you can apply for employment allowance up to 5,000. I think that's going to be increased, but currently it's up to £5,000 a year, which means that normally you would pay their national insurance and you would pay employers' national insurance. So the taxman gets tax from the employee and tax from you, basically, and puts them together. Employment allowance means that you don't have to pay your bit, but you will pay HMRC the bit you've taken from the employee. I hope that makes sense. Anyway, if you're looking at taking on staff, again, if you look on the HMRC website, it's generally pretty clear, or you can phone up and talk to a human. They're also helpful. There's a new employers helpline, which is quite helpful. Other things to bear in mind for tax: if you're a limited company or CIC, then you need to do a company tax return as well. They have to be sent in for that company's financial year. So it might not be the tax year. It depends on when the company's books are made up to. It might be July, it might be November. And then just a note on VAT as well. So everything has a VAT rating. A lot of unprocessed foods, like fruit and veg, have a 0% VAT rating, which is value added tax. So if I'm selling a bunch of carrots, I don't have to charge VAT on top of what I'm charging. Whereas if you are making like a chocolate cake and you want to sell it for £5, you have to add, I think it's 20% for things like chocolate cake. So then it would be another 20% on top of the £5 that you're selling it for, and you have to give that 20% bit to the taxman. Whereas fruit and veg is all 0 rated, so you don't need to worry about it. So you might think, well, why on earth would I register for VAT voluntarily? You have to register for VAT if you have a turnover of, it changes every tax year, it's something in the region of 88,000 to 90,000 turnover. So if you think, I'm a really small scale grower, I don't have a turnover anywhere near £80,000, why do I want to register for VAT when it just sounds like I have to fill in a load of forms for no reason? It's because even though you're charging no VAT on fruit and veg, you can claim the VAT back on stuff that you're buying, which is really useful for things like polytunnels, equipment you're buying new that has VAT added on. So fuel has VAT added on, but at a reduced rate. So pretty much anything you're buying, unless it's things like seeds and other bits and bobs, anything that's got a delivery charge tends to have VAT on top of the delivery charge. Equipment hire. You've probably seen, oh, actually that VAT was hundreds of pounds and it's really annoying. So if you register for VAT voluntarily, you can claim the VAT back. So it's worth looking into, and it's quite simple to do, especially if you're keeping on top of your accounts, even if it is a basic spreadsheet. So you can say, well, I've charged no VAT in this. You do it every quarter, every 3 months. I've charged no VAT on my stuff, but I want to claim back £500, please, on the stuff I've bought. And you just put in those figures into a spreadsheet, and then HMRC pay you probably about 10 days later. So definitely worth looking into. So I'm whizzing through. Just to mention about staff, we talked a bit about PAYE. So it might just be you working on your own. You might have freelancers or seasonal workers who have got jobs elsewhere, who say, "I'll come and work for you a day a week and I'll just invoice you." Or a contractor who will just invoice you, like someone to do your ploughing or something. If you have somebody who works for you all the time, then they really need to be on pay as you earn. They count as an employee. Um, so if you go down that route of having staff, just bear in mind that when you have employees, they are also eligible for holiday pay, sick pay, parental leave, and that can be on a temporary or permanent contract. You know, it might just be on a 6-month contract. It might be permanent. It might be permanent, but only minimum of 4 hours a week, and it changes all the time. So just bear that in mind. And there's quite a lot of information around, especially through places like the Better Food Traders, on people sharing contract templates and that kind of thing. And again, the government website is actually really useful for things like PAYE. Just to mention about volunteers, so if you have people working for you and you're not paying them, it's so it's on the face of it illegal. If they're basically doing a proper job, if they're doing an actual job, then you need to pay them, and you need to pay them national minimum wage or above. If your community project, things can be a bit different. You can have work party days. So we've done things like, oh, we need people to come and sit on some polytunnel plastic for a couple of hours, and we're going to have a nice lunch and that kind of thing. But that's a bit different from if you have regular volunteers coming in all the time. So it's just worth checking what the situation is, what you've got in mind, and just make sure it's legal. But also, apart from the legal side of things, it's also worth thinking about, do I want to be managing volunteers, or do I just want to pay someone to do the job? Because volunteers or woofers can be quite potluck sometimes, and you can just get amazing ones, and you can get ones that need a lot of hand holding and showing what to do, and they might do the wrong thing, and they might weed the wrong thing or destroy stuff that you didn't want to be destroyed. So it can be a headache, but it will depend on the model you have. If you have a much more community focused business rather than you're just a sole trader, then part of your business plan might be to get community engaged, in which case that's a really important element, is to have volunteers on farm. And then just a plug there for Take On Your Own Trainee. I mentioned the trainee network. So that would be a nice aim for people to have paid work and training at the same time. More paperwork, but don't panic. I'm just going to whiz through this quickly. So other things to think about are contracts and leases for if you're renting land or premises or equipment. Just have a look at contracts. Maybe get somebody legal or a knowledgeable friend to have a look over contracts for you. Lots of templates are available online as well, or you can ask other growers for what they would do. Planning permission, something to think about again. Generally, if it's a farm that has 5 hectares of land or more, things like tunnels and sheds, you can get permitted to come under permitted development. If you have less than 5 hectares, then generally you have to apply for planning permission to put up whatever it is. If it's an actual building, so polytunnels would counter that. If places like areas of outstanding natural beauty, AONBs, they might also have restrictions on things like polytunnels because they might think they're ugly. So just worth bearing that in mind as well, and making friends with your local council and finding out what the rules are in your area. Insurance is something to think about. So quite a few places that offer insurance, like NFU Mutual, but also smaller companies that offer more specialist. Cornish Mutual is one, and yeah, there's quite a few around there. Lots of discussions around good insurance to get for market gardening. At the sort of base level, you'll want public and product liability. So public liability is kind of the base one level of insurance you can get, and then you want to add on product liability just in case somebody ate something of yours and it didn't agree with them, or something happens, so get yourself insured. Once you've got that, you can also add on things like employers insurance for staff, but you'll also need employers insurance even if you only have volunteers, because legally they will count as employers insurance. You could add on equipment insurance, van insurance, cover specific things that you want covered, tractors and things. Maybe look at getting your own personal injury insurance, just in case, if you broke a leg, and would you be able to survive? Basically, would the business be able to survive? You can get things like business interruption insurance added on to a policy. Things like if something got flooded and you couldn't grow any veg for 6 months, maybe get that covered. So that's something to look at. It's quite difficult to insure polytunnels, but that's probably a topic for a separate discussion. The OGA forum has lots of chats on insurers and that kind of thing, and the Facebook UK Organic Market Gardeners Facebook group also has regular chats about insurance and the best deals. Quick mention of health and safety. So the hse.gov.uk website is very useful for that. Broadly, you need a written plan for 5 or more employees. If you have less than that, then it can be an informal verbal plan, basically. There are templates for health and safety documents. There is something that I would like to get on the OGA website just as a basic template, that people can just copy and then put in their own bits and bobs for things like risk assessment and also health and safety. It's a good idea to have a first aid kit somewhere for plasters and things. And general health and safety is kind of, don't be an idiot, don't put a fork in your shoe, don't use equipment you're not trained to work on, that kind of thing. And then individual, more detailed risk assessments for things like a risk would be putting raw manure on beds that food are going to be on, so we're only going to put composted manure on there, things like that. Environmental health, so when you set up as a market garden, if you register with your local environmental health through your council and just say, I'm setting up as a veg growers business. I think it was just a 1-page form I filled in with the council, and they just file it, and every now and then they say, are you still operating? Are you still doing the same thing? And they just see you as very, very low risk. If you're then doing things like processing gluts, or you've got a kitchen on site and that kind of thing, you're a higher risk, and they might come out and inspect you and things, but generally they see you as pretty low risk. And then just to mention for organic certification, if you want to go straight into that, obviously it takes 2 years to go into conversion before you can call yourself organic. Some small scale market gardeners choose not to be organic, or at least not to start with. They might work up to that. It generally costs about £500 a year to be certified, either with Soil Association, OF&G, or the Biodynamic Association. And then you get inspected every year. And like I say, you're not allowed to call yourself organic unless you have organic certification. It's a legally protected word to say you're organic. So if you see people saying organic vegetables and they're not certified, then you can say, excuse me. And then just to mention for things like trading standards and descriptions. So you can't call a cauliflower a tomato. So it's a lot of common sense things. Things like scales, it's worth checking that they are trading standards compliant, and I think you can get them checked. But most scales, when you buy them new, especially if they're UK scales, they will say if they're compliant with trading standards. So basically they're accurate. And people aren't thinking that they're buying a kilo of carrots and they're only getting 600 grams or something. But there's quite a lot of information on trading standards website as well. Right, we're nearly there. This is something I think it would be good to have a more in-depth look at a later webinar, and it's about profitable crops. So which crops actually make money, and that's very difficult to work out, especially as it takes you a year basically to grow stuff, and then you have to think, actually you have to sit down and work all the data. But in my first year of growing, which was part-time as I started up, I just tried to get some rough costings down. just to see, and I put things like the total cost. I've got a more in-depth spreadsheets, and this is the summary, but the in-depth spreadsheets had things like time taken to sow it, time taken to train it if it was trained, time taken to weed it if I was using weeding, or if it was done through fabric, that kind of thing, and tried to come up with an approximate cost of growing that crop in total, based on a metre square. And that would also be based on things like it's in a polytunnel. So there was a cost of growing it under plastic rather than outside is obviously more in a polytunnel because you paid for the polytunnel. You may have paid for the water. But basically, this is the summary. So roughly, there's a rough cost there in the yellow column of how much the crops have cost to grow, and then how much money the crops made. And then you can work out the return per pound. So you can see the red. So in the second column, or the third column, sorry, there's 4 things there highlighted in green, which were the 4 biggest earners. And you might think those are the profitable ones because they've brought in the most money. But actually, a couple of them cost the most to grow. So just because something's making lots of money, you're selling it for lots of money, doesn't mean it's making money. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't, so it's worth double checking. So you can see the kind of red or pink colour there. Yeah, yes, leeks brought in a lot of money, but actually they were quite cheap to grow, so they were one of my most profitable crops. Salad bags brought in quite a lot of money, but were a bit more to grow, but even so, they were still a profitable crop. And then things like tomatoes brought in lots of money, but cost a lot to grow because of side shooting every week or so. And then obviously picking takes longer. So even though it was decent, it wasn't the most profitable, and this will change year on year, obviously, depending on prices and how things do and how efficient you are at stuff and the weather. But I just wanted to pop that up there, which we might look at in more detail at a later webinar. Okay, I think I've whizzed through everything. Let me see if I can get some. Okay, let's have a look. The employment contract templates. Yep, I will have a look at that. Are you there, Lizzie? I'm just wondering what the best thing to do is, whether I try and put the CSA cropping tools. And maybe I'll make a list of links and I'll email them afterwards. That might be the easiest thing.
Yeah, I can send them out to everyone
That would be
via
great.
email.
So the CSA cropping tool and the Better Food Traders. I think it's not on their website. You may have to be a member to access them. I seem to remember there was a Google Documents folder. So that might be a members only thing. But I will check and put that on there. Right, those were those 2.
There's a couple in the chat that's not too long. There's just one about from my scrolling thing's gone. From Ed about North Lincolnshire is not a very affluent area. Do you think that's a market restriction, as in higher cost versus supermarket organic veg boxes more limited to more affluent counties or areas?
I think that's a really important question. And you sort of instinctively want to say, oh, if it's not an affluent area, then you'll struggle. But actually, the experience I've had with veg boxes and organic veg generally is it's not always the affluent areas that buy organic veg. It's more about what people's values are, and that's not always income dependent. So yeah, that will be an interesting one. You might find if there's quite like a sort of environmentally minded area, but not necessarily that well off, then there'll be a lot of interest. If people sort of aren't really bothered where their food comes from, or they have such low income that they just can't afford the time, that would be great to think about it, but I'm just trying to survive, then obviously that's very difficult, and that might suit a different kind of project. I know quite a lot of veg box companies now will do a supported box price. So people who can afford it will pay a bit more for boxes. And then if you are on lower incomes, you can say, I'm on a lower income, but I would still really like to support this. And so you can get a sort of a supported veg box price. That might be one option. Or if it's a more community minded enterprise, you might also be able to find some funding that will subsidise veg boxes, for example, so to help keep prices low for that reason. So that might be another way to look, but it's not always, if you kind of think, oh, this is such a well-to-do area, I'm going to do so well here, and actually they're all shopping in Aldi and Lidl and spending their money on other things. So yeah, it's I don't know if that's helpful. Let's see if what else was there. Some people asking about recordings. Lovely. Oh yeah, question about business plans. Yes, that would be a useful session, wouldn't it?
I think those are all the questions on the chat.
Okay, cool.
There's one more on the Q&A box.
Look. A fair rent price for land. I think that will probably depend on whereabouts you are and what the land includes. So I think there was a discussion on the Facebook group that I mentioned quite recently about this, and the answers were kind of varying wildly. So some people said, oh, does it include fencing? Does it include water? Does it include polytunnels? Are there any other, is it just bare land and there's nothing there? Do you have access to anything? Can you share machinery? Is there a market or a shop there that you can share things with? Are you in Scotland? Are you near London? Are you in the southwest? Are you so that's quite a tricky one. I pay a proper peppercorn, what I think of as like bottom end rent of £500 a year, and that's a bare price for. So what we put in everything. So we put in the tunnels. Um, all the equipment's ours, that kind of thing. And so that's a kind of horse grazing rent, about £250 an acre horse grazing. But like I say, that's real base level rent. I don't think you'd find cheaper than that. And it's also because we offer where we are, the farm shop where we are, quite a lot of PR, and it's helpful that we're there, so that we give some more legitimacy. They've got their own beef, which is great, but they come from customers can have more of an experience of this is local food because we're there. So yeah, so that's a win-win, I think of. But I know other people who pay £3,000 a year, and that might include a polytunnel possibly. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that's helpful. Somewhere between a couple of £100 and a couple of thousand a year, depending on what's included. If you've got polytunnels and water and barns and stuff, then you're looking at more the thousands a year, I would say, and size, obviously. Hopefully that was helpful. Benchmark for pricing. Oh yes, that's something I should have included. So I said that pricing is probably a bit of a dark art. We've kind of got set prices now, but it was, especially in the early days, based on the Soil Association has a horticulture price database. Let me write that down. I'll send you the link for that as well. So they send what the prices were last week, and they put it all on their website, and that's really useful. But also, we just keep an eye on what things like supermarkets and Riverford and wholesalers are charging, but don't necessarily base it on that, because sometimes the prices are massively high and we've got loads of whatever it is and just want to get rid of it, and then equally sometimes the price is really low and we've hardly got any of something, so we're going to get as much as we can for it. So you kind of need all these sources and you throw them all in the pot, and then over the years you kind of get rough prices that you think are fair and what everyone else seems to be charging, more or less. So hopefully that's it. But I'll add the price list in the list of links to send out for afterwards. So hopefully that will be useful. What would you say your biggest barrier was when taking on employees? Do you have less than 5? Yes, I have less than 5. I've got one employee part-time, so he does more hours in the summer than in the winter. There's myself, I tend to work school hours while my son's at school, pardon me, although I still obviously do paperwork and other things at home in the evenings. And then in the summer we do sometimes have seasonal workers as well, just to help with things like, you know, weeding if we've got like or projects or whatever, putting up tunnels and things. I think my biggest barrier, so I started taking somebody on in 2015 for the first time. Up to then it was 3 years, 4 years of just me. The biggest barrier is probably mental. You feel like it's financial, like I can't afford it, I can't afford it, I can't afford it. But it's mental. It's kind of taking the gamble of, okay, I'm just gonna make sure I've got a month's worth of wages in the bank, so that whatever happens, I can pay them, you know, for that month, and then hopefully over the months they'll have added to the business, so we'll have more money coming in and that kind of thing. Once you've made the mental leap of, oh, I've got to kind of tell people what I'm thinking now, which is which is quite tricky. How can you not just read my mind and know I meant that row, not that row? Or and it's quite a good discipline to be able to communicate properly, which I'm still learning. So yeah, that's probably the biggest challenge, is just mental. But then once you've done it, it's much easier, and hopefully, you know, the employees will, and the staff will add so much to your business that it means, you know, you can be ill or actually have a couple of days off, and all those kind of crazy things. But yeah, thank you for that. Let's just see, was there any more questions? Like values, not bucks. Yes, quite right, Ed. Talking about sometimes it is just about values. I can remember, again, going back to veg boxes, the best payers were the people who didn't have much money. They would pay on time because they knew how important it was. And quite often I would be chasing up box customers who had the fancy bank accounts and they'd leave it months and months because they just didn't, you know, they just sort of didn't realize the importance of getting money in for stuff that you've paid for. So yeah, that's always quite interesting. But yeah, if there are any other questions, stick them in the chat, and then otherwise I'll make a list of these useful addresses, and then if I forward them to you, Lizzie, you can share them around, perhaps.
Yeah, I'll send them to everyone.
Great, thank you. Okay, I'll just say that I've answered these questions because about the links to the CSA cropping tool and things, because I will. Yeah. Okay, cool. I can't see anything else coming in. So, well, thank you very much for that, everybody. I hope some of that was useful, just as a starting point. And like I say, we're kind of thinking about things to cover in future sessions. So if there's something in particular, I know somebody mentioned business plan, and also we were talking about maybe doing a profitable crops session at some point, which I always find, I'm just nosy. I just like to know what everyone else finds useful, you know, profitable to grow. So, but yeah, I'll hand over to you, Lizzie.
Thank you so much, Kate. That was really, really informative, and you seem to have answered everyone's questions before they even asked them. So that's good. Yeah, if anyone has any more ideas for webinars, or if they want to host an on-farm event, then you can email me. I've just put my email address in the chat. But yeah, I will put the recording on YouTube in the next few days, and you can watch it back. And hopefully we will have a kind of, yeah, as Kate said, like follow-up one, possibly on profitable crops, possibly on more business planning, or everything in between. Thank you, Kate, so much for taking the time to deliver all this information. And yeah, I hope everyone has a lovely evening.
Oh yeah, hopefully see you, some of you, at the AGM on Saturday.
Yes. I will. Thanks, Joe. I will include that as well. There's also a question from Tola. Sorry, I don't know if you just have time to answer that quickly.
No, that's fine. Let's have a look. If it's just wondering if it's important to cover the hungry gap to be financially viable. I mean, that's a really good question. That's almost another session in itself. I think there's two approaches. One could be make as much money as you can from the easy stuff and use that to keep you going in the quieter months. if that's possible. Like there may be a ceiling to how many tomatoes you can grow and sell and that kind of thing. It's certainly difficult cash flow wise in the Hungry Gap. I've over the years done more things like currants and perennials and herbs just to keep things ticking over, and early crops in the summer and in the spring, so spinach and quick growing things to shove in a tunnel. Especially like you say, if you've got an employee and you want to keep the money coming in. So it is useful to do something. Another version might be, is this business going to be your only income, or are you going to have other income streams? If you've got other income streams, will that cover the quieter times? I mean, obviously the trouble is with the Hungry Gap is just because you haven't got much to sell doesn't mean there isn't much to do. That's when you're doing lots of ground prep and sowing and planting, and probably weeding. So so what's my answer? Is it yes or no? I think I'm gonna sit on the fence and say it depends. My favourite answer. You could just go in hard and make as much as you can in the summer and autumn, and keep that, use that money to keep you going. But would you lose some, especially if you're doing things like veg boxes or market stalls? Would you lose customers if you don't have something in the Hungry Gap, whether that's buying in or your own stuff? If you're selling mostly wholesale, or you've got very seasonal loyal customers who will just buy whatever you have whenever you have it, maybe you don't need to worry so much about a Hungry Gap. In which case you can concentrate on doing all the fun stuff in the sunshine. Whereas if you will lose customers and that, or you just want food available in the Hungry Gap, I mean, it is worth a lot. You can charge good money for, PSB and spring greens and that kind of thing, because no one else has got any. Another opportunity. Then to have a look. I think it at the end of the day, it just depends on your market. So it can be financially viable either way, as long as it suits your market. That's a proper fence-sitting answer, isn't it?
Brilliant. Thank you, Kate. Right then, that's that. Have a lovely evening, one and all.
Thanks, everyone.
See you on Saturday. Bye.